The House Judiciary Committee wants the full Mueller report, the latest on the push for subpoenas involving the Russia investigation. The debate over healthcare in America, as the president claims it'll be the hallmark of the Republican Party, a look at the GOP plans. And after multiple scandals seemingly faded away, new calls for the governor of Virginia to resign. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
House Democrats try to force the Justice Department to give up the full Mueller report. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Browder. The Attorney General is preparing a redacted version of the Russia probe for Congress. But House Democrats are demanding more.
Today, voting to use the power of the subpoena to see all the findings of Mueller's investigation. Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson joins us now. Abigail, we understand the subpoenas aren't just for documents.
That's right, John. In addition to going after the full, unredacted Mueller report, they also want any evidence, any documents Mueller might have collected during his investigation, any supporting documents, as well as subpoenas for interviews with people associated with the Trump administration. Take a look.
I frankly believe that we are being both fair and balanced.
Democrats in the House made it official and partisan.
Right, this committee has the right and the responsibility to see the full contents of this report.
Voting 24-17 along party lines to authorize subpoenas, but waiting before firing them off. Attorney General William Barr has already promised to get them a version scrubbed of classified material, secret grand jury testimony, and anything related to ongoing investigations or the personal privacy of third parties.
The department is wrong to try to withhold that information.
But that's not enough for the House Judiciary Chairman.
The Constitution charges Congress with holding the president accountable for alleged official misconduct. That job requires us to evaluate the evidence for ourselves, not the Attorney General's summary, not a substantially redacted synopsis, but the full report.
Representative Jerry Nadler compared Mueller's report to the release of the Starr report into President Clinton.
Boxes of such information produced by Ken Starr.
And the Nixon impeachment process.
Just some of the grand jury material.
Georgia Republican Doug Collins called those props apples and oranges.
Starr, Mueller. It just doesn't work.
They're sore losers.
The White House maintains the report's release is up to the Attorney General.
Anything that's given to them will never be good enough.
Today's authorization includes subpoenas for 5 Trump administration officials: Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, Hope Hicks, Donald McGahn, and Annie Donaldson. As to whether the Attorney General will have the ultimate decision as to what to release and what to keep private, that will likely be made in the courts.
Abigail, what's been the response on Capitol Hill to the subpoena vote?
Well, Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee say that this is unnecessary because they think the Attorney General Barr has already promised that he will release the report, and they say that he is working, and I quote Mark Meadows on this, at warp speed to get this report out. But I also spoke with Republican Senator Mike Braun yesterday, who surprisingly said that he's not really bothered by the subpoenas and their moves and their actions, because he says if it speeds this up, he thinks that's fine. Take a look.
I think it would speed the process, and really whether that happens, I think Attorney General Barr will do everything he can to make it as explicit as he can, given the qualifications that he has to adhere to.
Either way, I think it's just a matter of weeks, if not a few months, before this report is finally released to the American public.
Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you.
Well, President Trump is pushing Republicans to come up with a new plan for health care. He says the GOP cannot afford to avoid the issue, but he's made it clear action won't come until after the 2020 election. CBN News White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us from the North Lawn with what's behind this new strategy. Ben?
Well, Jenna, heading into 2020, the White House knows health care will be a key issue. The president does admit Democrats used it to their advantage in the midterms, and he wants to take it away from them this time around.
We have an election coming up.
1 week after the president boasted he would make Republicans the party of health care, GOP leaders made it clear they have no intention of pushing through a bill anytime soon.
So I made it clear to him we were not going to be doing that in the Senate.
Trump tweeted Wednesday that he was never planning a vote prior to the 2020 election and never asked Mitch McConnell for a vote before the election.
Republicans should not run away from health care.
The commander-in-chief delivered a campaign-style speech Tuesday night, admitting that we blew it in 2017 and wants to make it up in 2020.
We're going to come up with a health care plan. We're not going to vote on it until after the election.
His timeline change comes after the administration decided to support ending Obamacare through the courts, a move that could leave millions without health insurance.
I was disappointed when we were talking about repeal only without a credible plan to replace.
The president maintains they will have a plan in place if the courts ultimately rule the Affordable Care Act is out, adding that pre-existing conditions will be covered. I just spoke with Marie Fishbaugh of the Heritage Foundation, who made some recommendations to the president on how to lower health care. It turns out he included the concepts in his 2020 budget.
Largely, he would get rid of a failed entitlement spending scheme that gives insurance companies more money under Obamacare every time they raise prices and replace it with a formula grant to states that would make sure that people, not a bureaucrat, could choose the right plan for them.
A Political Morning poll today found that 59% of voters said they don't have much trust at all in the president on health care. What do you think that says, as he wants health care to be a key issue for Republicans?
Well, I think Americans are definitely telling us that health care matters. We see this in poll after poll after poll. And the president is right to want to develop a concrete proposal that can be measured and assessed for whether or not it meets those goals that Americans have laid out.
Now, the White House has stopped short of any new health care specifics, and I really don't imagine an official proposal would surface until the courts make a ruling on Obamacare. Ben Kennedy, CBN News, the White House.
Thanks, Ben. President Trump is doubling down on his call to close the border, tweeting today, Congress needs to act immediately to fix immigration loopholes and, quote, this is a national emergency. Closing the border is an unpopular idea among many here in Washington, including lawmakers within the president's own party, although most do agree a rise of immigrants is overwhelming Customs and Border Patrol.
I'm not familiar with any plans out of the administration. I can just tell you from my perspective, we need to keep the legitimate trade and travel from going across the border, flowing across the border. It's so important for our economy. Mexico also needs to step up and do their part to address this issue, and the countries in Central America need to do their part as well. We are at really a breaking point for capacity within Homeland Security.
President Trump says closing the border could damage the U.S. economy, adding, quote, security is more important to me than trade.
Here now is our panel, Julia Manchester with The Hill and David Brody, CBN News Chief Political Analyst. Both of you, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Julia, to you first. How big of a problem is the situation at the southern border? Is President Trump, is it a national emergency like he says it is?
Well, Jenna, I think it really depends who you talk to. I think Republicans and the president's allies would say that Customs and Border Patrol are absolutely overwhelmed by migrants coming from those 3 Central American countries, Guatemala, El Salvador. However, I think a lot of Democrats would say, while it is certainly an issue, the situation at the border, they wouldn't necessarily call it a crisis. They're essentially calling for maybe more resources at the border. They're not going as far to shut the border down. However, you've heard a lot of Democrats, proposing this kind of smart wall by putting more technology, cyber technology down there. So 2 completely different approaches, really, but it depends who you talk to as to whether it's a quote-unquote crisis.
David, do you think the president will actually follow through on his threat to close down the border? Because you had Representative Mark Meadows, one of his closest allies on Capitol Hill, say today that he doesn't think the president will ultimately go that far.
Yeah, I think Meadows is right, and Meadows has the the ear of the president, or whatever that is. But yes, I think so. Look, I think what we're seeing here is that this president, even on Twitter today, he says we're gonna close the border. He says, or big stretches of the border. So already there's a backtrack there, and I've been talking to some of my sources at the White House who say, look, this thing is not necessarily going to close fully, the border. They're trying to figure out the economic impact of it. So I think they're looking at ports of entry from a shipping perspective. That's the economic impact. those won't close. I think the issue is, will ports eventually close at the civilian or the citizen level, where cars come in? That's the difference.
Yeah, a lot of concern about the avocados coming up from
well, we need to be concerned about the avocados.
from Mexico. David, on the topic of health care, can this be a winning issue for Republicans? President Trump, he sure seems to think so.
Well, he wants to win this issue politically. He knows that the Democrats own the health care issue, so he wants to win it. What a shock that Donald Trump wants to win, right? That's what he always wants to do. So that's the political calculus here. Take it away from the Democrats. Now, when I was talking to some White House sources this morning, they were saying that he's not punting this to 2020. They said, no, it's not punting. He's clarifying. That's the word. He's clarifying that he wants the vote until after the 2020 election, which, if you think about it, does make sense. I mean, why in the world would you actually vote on any sort of thing that the House Democrats can get a hold of? And that's going to water down something that you want eventually. But look, ultimately, what does Trump do here? He always starts on Twitter and then works backwards, doesn't he? Right? It's like he comes up with a tweet and then all of a sudden, well, now let's work out the details. Usually it's the other way around.
Julia, what's your sense? You have your ear to the ground. How do you think this is all going to play out?
Well, it's interesting because last week I was actually talking to a couple of Republicans on the Hill, and I think they were all taken off guard as to what happened. No one told them that they were going to be the party of health care. I mean, Chuck Grassley, a very senior Republican in the Senate, said that I was just looking to lower prescription drug prices, something that Republicans and Democrats do agree with. However, I think the president really wants to get as many of his campaign promises fulfilled in time for 2020. We saw that he made major progress with renegotiating NAFTA and USMCA, as well as, declaring that state of emergency at the southern border. So he's kind of, making this progress and, maybe achieving some of those goals. And I think he really views healthcare as a check on that list. The problem is Obamacare, while it's not perfect, according to many polls, is actually very popular with the American people. And there needs to be improvements made to it, and I think a lot of Democrats would agree with that, but I think that's what Republicans are really concerned about and how the president is really approaching this.
And one quick addendum on that, if the Supreme Court rules that Obamacare is unconstitutional, a lot of Democrats are saying, well, then everybody's going to lose their health care. The White House telling me, no, that wouldn't be the case. Congress would then put some sort of 3-month, 6-month, whatever it is, extension in place to make sure those folks don't lose their health care. Congress is good at extending stuff.
They're very good at kicking the can.
Kicking the can down the road, yeah.
That's right.
Julia, in the House Judiciary Committee, they are demanding the full Mueller report. Attorney General Bill Barr, of course, he has cleared the Trump administration, the Trump campaign, of any wrongdoing as it relates to Russia. Democrats, they just do not seem willing to let this go.
Yeah, and I think they really need to proceed with caution on this issue, especially going into 2020. I think a lot of Americans, while the majority of Americans, have said in polling that they do want the report to eventually be made public. The problem is, I don't think this is, I think most Americans view this as kind of the final word. Look, the investigation's over. Let's move on. Let's talk about immigration, the economy, healthcare. So they're really trying to play it. They should try to play it safe there. However, I think a lot of Democrats are trying to save face in all of this. They were pushing this narrative that there was some sort of collusion. They see at the end of the report, there was no really conclusion as to whether the president obstructed justice according to Mueller. Barr said there wasn't sufficient evidence. I think they want to cling on to that. So, they're not going to stop, but they really have to proceed with caution.
And what does Barr have to do here? What is he obligated to do? David, this question to you. Does he have to hand over the full report just because it's been subpoenaed?
No, not necessarily. Democrats want that underlying evidence, and which is interesting because basically that's like, we want the report, and oh, by the way, we want every single PDF file attachment
classified information
that goes with it. Yeah, classified. I mean, first of all, that's a bit irresponsible to have an unredacted report, whatever you think, if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Now, Barr's not under any obligation there, but there is a PR obligation. There is a political obligation to the point where you can kind of satisfy both parties. I think it's going to be messy. I think what's interesting to watch is, will there be any sort of special counsel investigation into how this whole thing got started to begin with? My sources are telling me no, that's not going to happen. But there might be an IG report, like an Inspector General report that the DOJ may do at some point.
Last question for you. Late today, Republicans used the nuclear option to unilaterally change the Senate rules to allow quicker confirmation for President Trump's judicial and executive level nominees. Does this put the onus on Republicans to make sure that they stay in power in 2020? Because if the roles reverse and you have a Democratic president, then
Yeah, for sure, I think it does. But this all started with Harry Reid in 2013. I mean, even the Democrats admit that. And so this has been a game of chess and checkers and Parcheesi and chutes and ladders. Who knows? There's tons of games. But that's what's been going on. And so now McConnell has raised the stakes even a little bit more. But look, in this political climate, you got to do what you got to do. At least that's the thinking on both sides.
Yeah, Julie, a final word?
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree. I think, a lot of Democrats are looking at this and, thinking, this could change for us. However, it has to do with the precedent really going forward and how, how it changes when, power changes and such.
All right, Julia Manchester, David Brody, thank you both.
Thanks, guys.
Well, former Vice President Joe Biden responding this afternoon to multiple claims of inappropriate contact with women. In a video he posted on Twitter, the possible 2020 presidential candidate defended his past behaviors, but noted social norms are changing.
I'll be much more mindful. That's my responsibility, and I'll meet it. But I'll always believe governing, quite frankly, life for that matter, is about connecting with people. That won't change, but I will be more mindful and respectful of people's personal space. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I've worked my whole life to empower women. I've worked my whole life to prevent abuse. I've written, and so the idea that I can't adjust to the fact that personal space is important, more important than it's ever been, is just not thinkable. I will.
Biden has been polling at the head of the Democratic pack of presidential hopefuls, though he has yet to officially announce his 2020 campaign.
Sexual assault allegations, racist photos, and new calls for resignations. Up next, the state of politics in Virginia.
Welcome back. Virginia's lieutenant governor says those recent allegations of sexual assault go against everything he stands for in his public and private life. Just a day after one of his accusers gave her first television interview, Democrat Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax today addressed those claims.
He is now making public a polygraph test he took regarding those assault allegations, which he notes he passed. And he's also calling on law enforcement to take a look into these situations.
My attorney has, at my direction, requested that the prosecutors in Boston, Massachusetts, and in Durham, North Carolina, launch an investigation of these allegations, and I've offered my full cooperation. I will answer any and all questions, and I am willing to do so under oath and under penalty of perjury.
Both of Fairfax's accusers want a bipartisan public hearing on the matter. The Virginia House Majority Leader today said there doesn't seem to be enough support among lawmakers for that.
And Fairfax isn't the only top Virginia lawmaker embroiled in controversy right now. Just a few months ago, the Commonwealth's governor faced back-to-back scandals, one over infanticide comments and the other over resurfaced blackface photos.
Well, today was the last day of the Virginia legislative session, drawing protests at the state capitol demanding that Democrat Governor Ralph Northam resign over those two issues. Eric Phillips is in Richmond with the story.
Here in Richmond on Veto Day, which is the last day of the General Assembly, marches and rallies for pro-life. Meanwhile, some are calling on Governor Ralph Northam to answer some unanswered questions. Others flatly calling on him to resign. During a morning news conference, House Republicans called for Governor Northam to answer questions that still linger from the controversial yearbook photo in which the governor may have appeared in blackface. They say the investigation has gone cold and they want to heat it up.
What happened to the investigation he promised? What happened to the private investigator he was going to hire? What happened to the facial recognition software he was going to employ to get to the bottom of this photograph? Has the governor found out yet who is in the photo, as he promised he would? Has the governor yet learned how the photo got in his yearbook page?
Today, a coalition of Virginians also called for Northam's resignation because of what they call his support of racism and infanticide.
Of course, Northam, whose nickname was Coon Man, knew exactly what he was doing in his yearbook page. Likewise, he, as a pediatric neurologist, knows exactly what happens when you leave a newborn baby to die of exposure and neglect in a hospital of all places.
The lieutenant governor also back under scrutiny this week as the two women who accused him of sexual assault spoke out for the very first time on television. House Republicans are proposing a hearing to really delve into these allegations, but so far, Democrats have said no. And without bipartisan support, the chances of a public hearing are slim to none. In Richmond, Virginia, Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Thanks, Eric. Coming up, how one ministry is helping prepare offenders for success after prison, and why they say addressing spiritual needs is the key.
Welcome back. Well, conditions within the Alabama prison system violate the Constitution. That's according to new findings from the Justice Department. The DOJ says Alabama prisons are failing to protect inmates from violence and sexual abuse, calling the problem severe and systematic. The Justice Department warning Alabama it has 2 months to fix the problem or it may sue the state.
Well, while the government works to make progress on criminal justice reform, one Texas program leads the way.
As Amber Strong explains, they say their secret is simple: Jesus.
With all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect, proud graduates take the stage one by one.
Terry Brown, salutatorian.
This isn't any ordinary graduation. Typical commencement speakers.
According to Proverbs 31, verse 8, that we have to learn, if we want to stand out in life, stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves.
Each student is a success story courtesy of the Texas Offenders Reentry Initiative.
The Tory program boasts an impressive 11% recidivism rate. The national average sits at about 50%. That means that when you walk through these doors, you're more than likely not walking back into a prison.
Inside headquarters, staff members are hard at work preparing citizens for success as they return to life on the outside.
Organize my thoughts, then I put it on paper.
In 2005, folks like this flooded Dallas homeless shelters, unable to find work, housing, or a way forward. That's when the city reached out to the Potter's House and Bishop T.D. Jakes.
Bishop did a clarion call to the congregation and said, listen, here's the issue, here's what our community is saying, but I know there are judges in here, there are lawyers and teachers and doctors and social workers. I mean, all these professions are within the church. Now let's figure out what we need to do.
Working with community leaders and businesses, team members secure housing and jobs while helping clear criminal records and addressing other needs.
That landlord may not rent to you, but they'll rent to me. So I'll go in there and I'll tell them about the Tory program, how much they've progressed in a short window of time, and how this tenant may be the most loyal tenant you'll ever have.
14 years and 23,000 success stories later, the program is thriving.
This is not rocket science, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's every human's basic needs. If we would make those accessible to our citizens who are coming home, we wouldn't have to build more prisons.
A key element of this reformation process is that it doesn't just begin outside the prison. Some volunteers meet inmates before their release. People like Shane Gregory, who can relate because he's been there.
November the 14th, 2008, I got out of prison. And I was going back in November the 14th, 2017. I heard my spirit ask me, what you think I brought you out for? Tory really blessed me to actually see the effect on what the effect is on actually them seeing somebody like themselves that actually has made up their mind. They're not coming back.
Veronica Berry, a former client and now successful business owner, says she owes it all to the lessons learned here at Tory, both educational and spiritual.
Trust God. Do not give up on yourself and do not give up on that hope.
Amber Strong, CBN News in Dallas, Texas.
You know, it's amazing, a state that has been known as a criminal justice reform state. Texas is really leading the way to show how you can actually do it in a way that that makes it better for these people once they get out of prison.
Absolutely, a second chance.
Yeah. Well, that's going to do it tonight for Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.